listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
You're listening to Framework Focus, the podcast that explores trends, innovations, and insights in the long-term care pharmacy industry. Join us as we connect the entire LTC ecosystem.
Welcome, listeners, once again to Framework Focus. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Fulton, a pharmacist, a technology expert, and all sorts of other things. And today, I am a very gracious podcast host. We are welcoming you to Framework Focus, brought to you by SoftWriters, the first and only software firm 100% focused on the unique needs and workflows of the long-term care pharmacy. And with me today is a very special guest. As you can see, I'm welcoming the groundhog's prediction for an early spring. I got my floral shirt on. I'm ready for the warm weather. Let's bring it on. And I also want to bring on my very special guest. With me today is Shelly Spiro. Shelly is the Executive Director of the Pharmacy Health Information Technology Collaborative, or the Pharmacy HIT Collaborative. That's quite a mouthful. Todd Urey, my co-host today, standing there beside me. Shelly, welcome to Framework Focus. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. And very pleased to be here to support all the work of pharmacy and pharmacy health IT.
Excellent. Well, we're so glad to have you, Shelly. Now, some of our listeners may already be familiar with you. You are an industry legend. You're well-known and networked across multiple different industries. But let's take a gamble and assume that some of our listeners may not be as familiar with your background, with your career journey. Tell us a little bit about your start. Why did you pick pharmacy? And how did your career journey end up where it is today?
I have a great story for that in terms of how I got involved in pharmacy. I didn't even know what a pharmacist was growing up at all. I was very, very good in math and chemistry, and actually tutored organic chemistry to one of my colleagues that was working at Walgreens. He worked there from a kid. He was sweeping the floor, and he said, "Shelly, you should go into pharmacy." I said, "Well, what is that?" I didn't even know what it was. I had to take several courses, but was admitted to the University of Illinois College of Pharmacy back in the 70s, a graduate of U of I and or UIC as they call it. And I have been involved in pharmacy ever since. I started out as a hospital pharmacist. And my husband went into the military. We were in the Air Force at many different bases across the United States and became civil service, worked in many different military installations, including I was trained by the Army for oncology, administered oncological products, and eventually moved back to my hometown in Las Vegas. And really I didn't care for oncology and the oncologist here in the Las Vegas area. And it's too long ago that people wouldn't remember. And had an ad with MediSave in a long-term care pharmacy. They weren't even doing IVs, and I'm part of the Army. We were in an IV shop that we did IVs. So many. So we started to do IVs, and we did home care, and we were one of the first pharmacies to go through Joint Commission for home care. And from there, I went on and to Kindred Healthcare. So I've had a very long background in long-term post-acute care, and became a president. I'm a past president of the American Society of Consultant Pharmacists. And just always fell in love with information technology. I probably drove my system vendor crazy because I kept on asking, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? And became a super user and just continued that through my career as I moved up nationally with Kindred And then in 2005, opened up my own consulting firm and really began to get more involved in health IT.
So I have a Shelly Spiro story, if I'm able to tell it.
Sure.
So Shelly's special to me in my career because the very first pharmacy conference that I attended ever back in, I think it was 2005 or 6, I can't remember, was the American Society of Consultant Pharmacists. And one of the speakers was this Shelly Spiro that was speaking on HIT. And it was the first pharmacist that I really, from a kind of a standards perspective and someone that was really building stuff, really took time. And you were patient enough with me, who had no pharmacy experience. I came from telecommunications. I came from the world of frame relay and building networks and building information flow and routers and router management. So you really helped to kind of give me a perspective of marrying pharmacy and data and workflow and networking and that with regards to my background at that time which was in pharmacy software. So there's an educator about you. You are a natural educator, and you do it through the context of what's meaningful to long-term care pharmacy. Well, at least the time, and then of course you started blowing up because of your knowledge and application and being able to marry those things, because that's complex stuff, and that's why I think NCPDP ended up, really looking to you for a lot of advisement based on what you started building with your consultancy. But that's my Shelly Spiro story because that's what I remember about you.
Thank you so much, Tom. That's a great story, and I've always wanted to be a teacher. And even today, I'll take time and talk to students and try to mentor them into health IT.
Oh, that's a really amazing enterprise that you're talking about there, Shelly, because reaching students at that level, getting somebody in on the ground floor of their career, I think it's sometimes an uphill battle, but educating these students about the opportunities that are out there that maybe you don't think of. Maybe you have this, there's like 11% of pharmacy jobs that are neither community pharmacy or hospital, but that's where it gets really interesting. And I've really enjoyed being privileged enough to play a part in those types of roles for the last 10 years of my career. It's just been tremendous, and it's unlocked and opened so many doors, and I think allowed me to contribute in so many new and dynamic ways, really making the profession better, but ultimately building better products and a better standard of care for folks who are in long-term post-acute care. So, Shelly, your organization is the Pharmacy HIT Collaborative. What exactly is PHIT, and what do they do? How do they help pharmacies?
Oh, well, it's not mine, first of all. I just happened to be the first executive director. It was actually formed in 2010 by the National Pharmacy Professional Associations that came out of the Joint Commission of Pharmacy Practitioners. It was been around for well over 40 years. And so in 2010, they decided that we should have an organization. We set it up as a collaborative. And it's open to only organizations, but to professional organizations. And really the mission of the collaborative is to ensure that pharmacists that provide clinical services are integrated into the national health IT infrastructure. And I know that's a lot of words and might not make a lot of sense, but it is dealing with the standards development organizations, making sure we go outside of pharmacy, working with our provider counterparts, and making sure that we can share information in an interoperable way, and really with the eye on pharmacy and all practice settings, just not long-term post-acute care. But LTPAC has really helped us identify a lot of the anomalies that take place in all aspects of pharmacy and how we get integrated with others in the healthcare profession.
So when we look at the way that pharmacies are networked and integrated there, we're at this massive turning point. I think when I zoom out and look at the trends that are happening here where I live in Pennsylvania, pharmacists are recognized as providers starting today. Shout out to all my pharmacists in PA who 8 o'clock this morning registered as providers with state Medicaid. So that's a win-win. And it's a huge turning point, but it's part of a larger trend. It's part of this larger trend where pharmacists are getting paid for their services instead of a product. And it opens the door for a service-based pharmacy business to establish itself and to actually make some money and be viable as a product. So, and one of the ways that we hear technology being adopted in today's market, right? The big buzzword is AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, ChatGPT. This has really taken over almost every industry by storm. We have a lot of businesses out there that are beginning to explore AI, look at how they can use it to solve customer problems, how they can use it to make the world a better, safer place. And there comes with that a lot of fear, though, and a lot of the unknown that we have. So, Shelly, since this is an area of expertise for you, I'd love to get your thoughts on what kind of challenges do pharmacies face, specifically long-term care pharmacies, and how can AI provide solutions to those problems or create new opportunities? What are the main ways that may impact how we practice?
So there is the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of artificial intelligence. And what, as clinicians, and especially as pharmacists, we have a responsibility to assure that the technology that we're using is safe and effective for our patients. And this is the key to, as clinicians. Now, I can give you the bits and bytes of what this is about, but I think it's more important to look at what we really need to focus on as a pharmacist when you're working with your system vendor. All the responsibility falls on the system vendor side to assure that the algorithms that are put into place based off of clinical decision support, what we call CDS, is correct from a clinical safety standpoint. And this is based off when you're building a clinical algorithm for clinical decision support, you're setting the parameters in place. If you don't set those parameters in place prior to releasing and teaching the computer, so you begin to teach it through machine learning. You're teaching that machine, that algorithm, the ins and outs of it, and then you're allowing the machine to go ahead and make the decisions with artificial intelligence. And then you get things like hallucinations, which is the machine is just doing what it isn't supposed to do. You get things like concept drift, where they're drifting away from that algorithm. Those are some of the technical things that we're working at now. But for long-term and post-acute care and for high-risk patients, this is the real concern, because most of our clinical decision support algorithms are built off of evidence-based medicine. And this is one of the reasons why, as clinicians, we're trying to put a stop on it. So recently, AMA came out and said they only want to use augmented intelligence. So augmented human intelligence is where in the algorithm you're placing stopping points for the algorithm to stop and let a human make that judgment decision to take a different path through that algorithm or that clinical decision support path. So that's a lot of the things that FDA is doing with some of the algorithms that have already been in place and where they're applying AI to digital solutions. But I think that this is where we really need to step in and assure that augmented, like the AMA, like augmented human intelligence is in those algorithms for clinical decision support. That's why most of what we recommend from a pharmacy clinician side is to apply artificial intelligence and machine learning to the supply chain, to administrative functions, to scheduling, to some of the other functions that aren't going to cause patient safety issues. Or if you are doing something very similar to what the radiologist did, which was to view multitude of millions of different images, But then you put those images of what falls out of that bell curve into a queue to allow the radiologist to then look at what's the right decision to take from there. So we're really concerned right now from a clinical standpoint more on prior authorization. This is an area that CMS is looking at also. They have a team of artificial intelligence group who are looking at prior authorizations so that you're not having the machine make those decisions, that there's a stopping point that some folks can or some patients can stop and look at, and the clinicians can stop and say, well, this really didn't meet what the requirement should be for prior authorization. So there's a lot of things that we have to watch out for as clinicians in artificial intelligence. That's why I say there's really good things to make pharmacists more productive, but there are some safeguards that we have to put in place for safety, fairness, population bias. These are all the areas that are because of the evidence-based medicine doesn't take place for certain groups and populations that fit into those clinical decision support algorithms.
That was a fantastic answer, Shelly, and really well thought out. I understand that we uncovered a lot of kind of boiling pots here and exposed the real complexity of what's happening beneath the surface. So you draw a really interesting comparison. We have artificial intelligence that can be used to merely augment the decision of a clinician, or conversely, on the other hand, make that decision for us. And that distinction is really important because exactly where do you draw the line that takes the human action, decision point, and liability and move it either further to the right or left? So
I think you're right. And I just want to reiterate the importance of a clinician's responsibility to their patients to now that a lot of the noise as time goes in and we see the machine learn more. Again, we trust that machine. We trust our systems to do what's right. And we have to be aware as more system vendors build more artificial intelligent tools into our systems to be more aware and come up with ways to look at some of the problems that can take place. That's our responsibility as a clinician.
No, it really does. And it puts a stronger onus on the provider on that supply side of the healthcare equation to take ownership of the risk, to take ownership of really what are we putting at risk here when we implement a solution that incorporates AI or machine learning. One of the biggest concerns that people have is data security. Right now,
yes,
it's every single day we hear about a data breach. There is an incident just recently, the Change Healthcare debacle, which has kind of made it very difficult for pharmacies to process claims here in the last few days. So there's a lot of folks out there that are concerned about their data, concerned about privacy, concerned about the regulations around it. So how should we approach that? And what kind of strategies can an organization implement for success when you're considering how best to protect data when you're implementing an AI or machine learning model?
I don't think I think AI can help us with security. And I want to also make it clear, the Change Healthcare incident was not just affecting pharmacy. I was just on a call today that is also affecting the long-term care facilities and some of their claims. This is a very serious issue that is actually taking place, and a lot of people are looking at that from the LT-PAC setting. So we've got a lot of problems, and of course in long-term care, especially in the SNF setting, pharmacists are dispensing medications without eligibility and some of the other stopgaps that are in place to make sure that we're going to be paid for those medications that are actually being dispensed. I think eventually AI will help us in preventing some of that security, but there are some tools that are used, at least from the standard standpoint, if you're looking at interoperable exchange and exchanging information, I'm talking outside the claims, but more clinical information being shared. There are ways that that information, especially through health information exchanges and others, that are built in appropriate security. That we don't have to, I mean, that's what our system vendors should be looking at. In terms of a pharmacy owner or operator, they have to work with their system vendors and those who are doing their internet connections and others to do an analysis to make sure that their networks are safe and secure. There's training I think you're going to see more of those types of policies coming into the actual pharmacy operations because of this. So it's many different levels, all the way down to the individual pharmacy owner and their system vendor, to the system vendor, to the switches, to how we're connecting, that all of those have to be more secure. And I believe there are some artificial intelligence tools that will be built eventually. Some have said blockchain, others have used other types of technology that will help us prevent future cyber attacks. They're just not ready today. And people are so smart when they want to do something bad. So they could use technology to do it. We just have to be diligent and watch what's happening and be aware of it.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the bad guys never take a day off.
That's true.
I think of the authority that's brought to the picture through blockchain and assuring where the information's coming from, and if another trusted source is verifying that information is true. And I see exactly what you mean for becoming a denial service attack protector, or anyone that's trying to infiltrate a specific connection or server to assure that where that's coming from has already been authenticated. So I was actually very surprised by the cyber attacks recently that Change Health experienced, because what I'm saying isn't science fiction. I mean, that kind of double back assurance technology via IP address should always take authority of where that IP address is coming from.
You know, and to Shelly's point, you know, the hackers are getting smarter every day, and there's no shortage of social engineering that goes on trying to essentially scam companies out of money and holding their data for ransom. And the way that most of these things happen, that we've seen statistically at least, is through social engineering. It's through people doing, you know, normal human behaviors and acting in a human way, but introducing risk, you know, without unintended, like clicking on a malicious link, or, you know, you scan a QR code that isn't legit, and, you know, you take some action, the next thing you know, all your data is missing. And so employers have to be extremely vigilant, and not just tech companies like ours, but, you know, every healthcare entity out there, you know, who uses technology. They need to be defensive. They need to be on their guard. So that's a really great point. You know,
I think it's a new area. I hate to interrupt you, but it's a new area for our students to get involved in, because this is an emerging area. And if they really are techie, because you do need some folks who understand the clinical workflows and where those points are, where other data is coming in, especially as we move to more interoperable exchange of clinical data. That opens more holes in your system for cyber attacks to occur. So we have to be really vigilant and look at your exchanges, look at your health information exchanges, your QHINs. The government has put a lot of effort into this area with TEFCA, the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreements, that those qualified health information networks are going through rigid types of security processes because of their role that they will play, very similar to how an AT&T or a Verizon is actually sending information as we do today. Those are areas that these qualified health information networks are going to be working with us as information, especially clinical information, begins to be exchanged.
You know, that is a terrific point you bring up, because, you know, I don't know if our listeners really know what a QHIN is, or a qualified health information network, or why that's so important. You can probably count these things on one hand, right? There's not that many out there. and the criteria that you need to meet to be an official ONC certified QHIN network, that's a pretty big barrier to achieve, right? And so once you're in there, that's a very strong seal of approval that organization is capable of kind of at least meeting what the current threats are for AI and data manipulation, malware, that kind of thing.
I think that those are some of the things that will help in the future, that will help tighten up our exchanges and not using as many open internet networks.
Mm-hmm. So when we look at AI and machine learning in the pharmacy, I went to Vive last year. I was out in Nashville and I saw, I would say, no less than 500 different AI-based or involved health tech startups, right? And everyone's trying to solve this puzzle in a little bit different way. And either they're going really broad or very, very narrow with the AI. And so there's an endless opportunity of companies out there who can provide an AI-based solution to customers who are pharmacies. However, there's still a lot of barriers. I think if I went and asked 100 of my customers, are you using an AI or machine learning tool in your pharmacy? Most would say no. Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the barriers to adoption? What's holding it back from AI being implemented more in a pharmacy setting? And how can we overcome some of those?
Well, that's a really good question. I think it's too new. So you have to realize what you're seeing now is what clinical decision support tools and AI have progressed to from 2-3 years ago. And you have to look, you really have to look under the hood. What was the clinical decision support algorithm built off of, or what was the decision support algorithm built off of? Was it using information where that model was based off a population from Korea or from China or from some other area that doesn't meet our patient population? And so those are the types of things that you see the current artificial intelligence being incorporated in. Now, your compendiums are working very hard on incorporating artificial intelligence into things like drug-drug interactions, mm-hmm. some of those other areas that have been around a while. But even if you look at drug-drug interactions, the basis of a drug-drug interaction algorithm is based off of the drug class, not the actual medication itself. And so I've been working on a project for the last 10 years with United States Pharmacopoeia, or USP, on trying to change the thought process of using the actual medication itself down to the ARCS number, the ARCS CUI code for the drug, because you can take a drug class. Good example is penicillin. And you've got all the cephalosporins and so that's what causes a lot of the alert fatigue. Even if you look at medications for lowering cholesterol, there are different side effects that occur. All of our side effects are codified for your packaging. That are your packaging instructions are based off of not granular enough to come up with the clinical manifestations. So there are a lot of problems with our current structure of our decision support within our systems that the compendiums use, but they're based off of an older type of model. And we have to change those models if we're going to be more successful, because you don't want to teach your machine to be taught from poor information. And so those are the things we're trying to do to fix, to really look under the hood, really see how that is done. And we have the technology now to make those changes now before we put more technology in place that is going to cause more alert fatigue.
Now, will you bring up an excellent example there, Shelly, because when you talk about alert fatigue, that's a real demon here in the pharmacy setting, especially as volumes increase, which they need to because margins are shrinking. And when we talk about the long-term care area especially, right? You're doing volumes that are far in excess of what you might see at a community pharmacy. And so to that end, when you have like the same alert popping up and you're clicking through it and clearing it out, 25, 50 times a day, that alert fatigue is very real. And that's how a lot of drug interactions, adverse drug events tend to happen. And there's a really cool parallel with this. You look at the airline industry, they had a very similar challenge with alert fatigue and pilots and looking at all the instrumentation, in an airplane. And again, I'm not a pilot. I am any pilots out there listening, you can just correct me in the comments. But the FAA did a lot of studies, and they, again, it wasn't AI or machine learning, but they made some changes to how and when the warning lights came on so that you could decrease that alert fatigue and actually have an appropriate response so that you would be able to take action when presented with that alert. I think that's definitely where we see the biggest application of AI in pharmacy, is helping us with those clinical screenings, making better decisions about drug-drug interactions and adverse drug events, preventing those things from occurring.
See, I would rather see it come in for things like checking the medications to make sure you've got the right med in the right bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that the machine could do much better than a human. And so we have to change some of our pharmacy laws that are in place through the state boards of pharmacy. There are some things that we need that would really help us with artificial intelligence. And I'm worried that we go to our clinical decisions first, where we should be going to some of those very manual functions that pharmacists have to do, that we can then apply to more clinical interventions that we can take what we were trained to do as pharmacists. And that's where we should be focusing on. But I don't see that happening because everybody wants to fix and save time for their pharmacists, but they're looking for more clinical reasons. Medication reconciliation is a good point, and one of the reasons why I'm working so hard on a new project that we're working on with the standardized medication profile, in coming up with creating medication types of lists codified in a way that we know what changes take place when a patient transitions from one location to the other, including discontinued medications, where we can then say the reasons why they were discontinued, which can help with prior authorizations and some of those other areas. So I think we need to really sit down and put a checklist together of what we should focus on first and sort of phase it out so we have all the constraints in place. But I'm hoping the next generation of pharmacists will come in and do that.
Right now in the IT space, AI is a solution looking for a problem, and it's really all over the place. And I think what you just alluded to there is very similar to, what we had talked about earlier. You have all these different firms out there trying to use AI to solve a whole bunch of different problems. It would be better if the industry aligned on what's the most important problem to solve. And then, okay, everybody go after that. And if we look at things that do have a clear right or wrong answer, so things like managing your inventory and organizing your delivery schedules and, some of your operations in-house, scheduling and staffing, using AI to optimize some of that so that you can kind of reduce some of your, your top line cost, could be a lot more fruitful. We could get to it sooner and you have less risk.
Look at drug manufacturing. There's a whole area of drug manufacturing that we can use and apply AI for newer drugs, better drugs, more targeted drugs. So there are several applications we can use within pharmacy. But if we're talking about pharmacy operations, I think we have to be very careful and really evaluate our clinical decision support tools that we're using and try to focus it on more of our everyday functions that aren't going to cause a patient safety issue.
I completely agree with that perspective. I think it's a very clear and nuanced way to look at this, because at the end of the day, right, our job as pharmacists is to protect the health of the public, to protect patient safety and ensure that they get the right drug at the right time and not something that's going to be harmful to them or pose an unnecessary risk. We are going to take a quick commercial break, and then we will be back with more discussion with Shelly Spiro here on Framework Focus.
Hey, I just want to say thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network. We are dedicated to bringing a myriad and diverse amount of content to you 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. And it is all driven by pharmacists, educating pharmacists, pharmacy technicians sharing, pharmacy professionals helping to build the better and future pharmacy care model. Tune in, go subscribe on all platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, Pharmacy Podcast Network. Thank you for all that you do.
And welcome back. Welcome back, listeners. You are listening to Framework Focus. My name is Dr. Mark Fulton. I'm here with my guest, Shelly Spiro, and we are talking with the executive director here of the Pharmacy HIT Collaborative, talking about AI and machine learning, especially how it applies to pharmacy practice, in particular, long-term care pharmacy practice, which is its own unique flavor of this wonderful profession. Shelly, welcome back.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I believe artificial intelligence has the potential to do to help us make better decisions, help us operate more efficiently, is in collaboration. You talked earlier about continuity of care and making sure that patient information is the same and shared across platforms, so that way when patients move from one level or site of care to the next, that information travels with them and can be easily, accurately shared. In your opinion, what kind of ways can AI continue to facilitate that collaboration between not just long-term care pharmacies, but providers, patients, caregivers, really other stakeholders for resident care?
Well, I think the most important thing is to look at a pharmacist's workflow. And if a pharmacist can't document in a very standardized way for their patients, and this is where your real productivity comes within your pharmacy management system, if you working with your vendor. And I'll share a story with you. Years ago, when we in pharmacy were focused on dispensing and doing a claim, we were sending multiple different types of claims until NCPDP, National Council for Prescription Drug Programs, came up with a standardized way of submitting data to the payer. And this is part of that standardization. And the system vendors were then be able to work on the workflow to make things more efficient, to increase the productivity of those pharmacists. And this is what you have to go back and look at the history of where we were before you can apply some of these new technologies, because you have to look at how your system vendor has built their system and the basic architecture of what it's built in and what it has the possibilities of doing. We noticed that clinical documentation does not have the same workflow as dispensing documentation. And this is where we began to work on standardizing the workflow of those pharmacists. You have to understand your workflow before you can apply artificial intelligence and machine learning. You have to make sure all of that is sound, safe, and effective for the patients you're taking care of. And so what we did was we tried to build standards for clinical documentation. This is where the pharmacist's electronic care plan came out of. But some of those tools can be applied to that clinical documentation portion to make that flow and that productivity of that pharmacist time much more effective. And so those are the types of things that you need to watch for. We can apply artificial intelligence to the dispensing workflow very easily, such as checking and allowing the machine to do more of the dispensing functions with robotics and other areas where you're going to increase your productivity of your clinicians, especially your pharmacists. These are the things that we need to do. The export of that information to be shared with others, or the import of that information from others in the care team or the patient patients themselves. You have to have a place to put this information within your system to make it usable to the clinicians. So there's a lot of work that's being done on the usability of the data. Too much data, you're never going to do it. And if it isn't built into the workflow, this is where clinical decision support tools are being used to move data from other electronic health records into, whether it's a pharmacy system or another provider system. That's where you want to look at artificial intelligence. What's the right information that I need to have? Do I need pharmacogenomics information? Do I need dispensed information? Do I need diagnosis information? Do I need the history and physical? What are the components that I need to really do my job? But I can't look at everything. I can't go in and look at an EHR and go through and do a chart review before I encounter a patient for clinical services. So having dashboards and that information in place, I believe that's a new role for clinical decision support that leads to artificial intelligence. But we have to watch it because you don't want bad information coming in. And I will tell you, our systems have a lot of bad information. Heard the term garbage in, garbage out. That's what we're going to get. So you got to make sure the garbage coming in isn't garbage.
You know, you talked a lot about interoperability and sharing data across systems. This really is being driven, that we're seeing today, it's being driven by regulations. They just put out, I think, the new info blocking penalties for, from the ONC on, look, they have these regulations that have been in place since April of 2021, but we really haven't had any teeth to it. And so now we're going to start enforcing it. Here are the penalties. I think we're going to see more firms trying to solve that problem or moving it up in importance, right? Solving the problem of how do we share data more effectively across platforms. And eventually it leads to this democratization of data that you have. And I know that term has come up a lot. I really love it. We're all going to be playing with the same playing field of the same data at some point, right? And the winner is going to be who can ask the right questions to get the desired answer, from this AI tool. Now you touched on risk, and I want to spend some more time on that for a moment. There was a lawsuit recently. United Healthcare had a lawsuit brought against them by a couple of patient families from long-term care, and the families allege that United Healthcare used an AI-based algorithm to make claim determinations, and these folks were denied coverage and subsequently passed away. And the families are suing, saying, hey, you can't just offset these decisions to the AI. You can't just go with whatever the AI spits out. There's a higher level of accountability for a healthcare organization. So as a pharmacy, how do I, think about ethical considerations? How do I look at the use of AI with respect to decision-making and patient care so that I stay on the above water when it comes to ethics?
Well, we need the time to learn about our patients. They are our patients. We need the time to understand them and understand their nuances, especially the aging population and those who can't speak for themselves and who are high risk. So we need the right tools to do that. If you don't believe that all of the large health plans in the United States haven't put AI in place for actuary purposes, they already know when you as an individual beneficiary are going to die. They have already predicted that. And so that's the extent of the artificial intelligence that is occurring within the health plans today. And what we're concerned about are those decisions going to be made for me who is at my age, as opposed to somebody who is your age. And we have to be able to assess that and do what's right for our patients. I think that's what the government wants us to do, but we have to have the time to do that. We have to have the right information to do that. We need to know the social determinants of health problems, the health inequity problems that are occurring. There are many factors that are out there that we're trying to share data in so that we as clinicians can make better decisions about our patients and their medication use. I think we're just at the beginning of doing all of this, and that's where we become good stewards of information. And that should be our role, to assure that that data is useful. But don't forget to learn about your patients. You can't just expect the computer to do it. You've got to be in their hands-on, really know your patients. And I think that that's the important piece that we need to focus on, especially for those in the LTPAC setting.
That's a great answer, Shelly. You know, it's very sobering to think that my insurance company already has in a spreadsheet somewhere my anticipated expiration date.
Yes.
That makes you take a pause. So, you know, when we think about ethics. So let me talk about what's my Monday morning advice. So somebody who's listening to this podcast, you're a pharmacist, you're a pharmacy professional, maybe you're a pharmacy IT professional. Okay, I want to get started. I want to learn more about AI. How do you even get started? So what are good Monday morning steps for our listeners in the pharmacy space who want to become more effective in the way that they incorporate AI? They want to know what's out there. They want to be able to use these new tools to maximize their pharmacy's efficiency and growth. Where do you even begin?
You begin with your system vendor. Talk to your system vendor. They're the ones who are the gatekeepers of the data. Work with them, understand what they're doing, understand what you want to do. How do you want to leverage your system to increase your productivity so you can see more patients, get more funding? This is more revenue coming into your operation. These are the areas that you need to work with your system vendor. You should be hand in hand, or at least somebody within your team needs to be working closely with your vendor to not just let them go off and do what has happened. Look at what happened in when we started the Meaningful Use program and got all of the system vendors to move towards electronic health records, which was really needed, especially in the hospital, in the nursing facility, and in the physician office setting. But they didn't listen to the clinicians. They came up with a standard workflow. Workflow is the key. You have to understand your workflow. You have to evaluate your workflow before you can apply any artificial intelligence. Now, in terms of where to go for this information, you could just search for it on any search engine that you have, and you'll come up with everything. Your pharmacy associations are working on this. Your standards development organizations. There's a lot of webinars out there, and the government. CMS and the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT has a lot of information on artificial intelligence and machine learning. FDA has spent a lot of time. So there's several sources of that information. Your schools of pharmacy. I can't think of any association program that's not out there that doesn't have anything on artificial intelligence. And I can't think of organizations like HIMSS and standards development organizations, NCPDP, HL7. They all have information on AI. They have sessions or courses you can take on this. So those are areas that you can look. It's all out there. I think they're leery because what's out there is still new. It's like you have a 5-year-old who's going to kindergarten and learning this stuff. And that's what the machine is doing. It's the same type of thing. We're even not at the high school level, let alone the college level, to release artificial intelligence. So I think those are the things that, it's still too new, but there's a lot of information out there.
I think that really sums it up well, because if you want information on AI, there's a billion people out there right now who will tell you everything they know about it. But the consensus is usually, here's AI, has a lot of opportunity, also has a lot of risk, and that's about everything we know. And everyone's kind of saying the same thing. And what I like is that your perspective is so nuanced, and it's a lot more in depth than some of this generic information we hear about AI. I'd like you to go ahead and get out your crystal ball for me. And let's talk about the future. Just don't tell me when I'm going to kick the bucket. I don't want to know. But looking ahead, what kind of like trends or innovations, what does that future look like at the intersection of AI, machine learning, and long-term care pharmacy?
It's going to be hard. Okay. This is not something that is going to happen overnight. What you have to watch out for are, and especially in long-term care pharmacy, because of population bias, you have to be very, very careful of what your system vendor, especially if they add additional modules on to help with your productivity within your workflow. You've got to look at those clinical decisions. Ask your vendor who is giving you an artificial intelligence tool to help you understand the algorithm that it's built off of and how the machine is being taught. So is it any different than any other practice setting? I don't think so. It's just more risky for our practice setting. Number one, we don't have the funding. We don't have the ability for reimbursement or incentives to adopt this type of technology. So there are many risk factors. There's a lot of work that the government is doing now on focusing on the LT-PAC setting with the 2014 Impact Act during transitions of care, and some of the assessments that are being done, and how do we automate that, because we're still very manual on a lot of processes. There's a lot of work that's being done in this particular setting, and we could take advantage of it. From a pharmacy standpoint, I would focus on artificial intelligence and machine learning tools for your supply chain, for your dispensing functions, for working with your robotics, anything that is going to decrease the manual touch of a pharmacist so that they can focus on their clinical efforts in taking care of the patients, identifying the anomalies, leveraging cues of information that gets rid of the noise on the patients that you don't have to worry about. We have our own challenges: community pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, long-term care pharmacy. These are all areas that have different workflows. You need to understand your work. Look under the hood. If you're buying a car, you look under the hood. Look under the hood of your vendor. Work with your vendor. They're your key to this information. Don't be afraid of them. They're there. You're their customer. Talk to them. They're going to help you.
You know, Shelly, I love that last piece of advice is just perfect. Look under the hood, people. Know what you're buying. I mean, the software that's out there today, it's incredible how complex it is and how much efficiencies you can get out of your software platform, especially if you work really close with your vendor. I know that on the software side, you know, my outfit, we work very closely with our customers to try to help them get whatever they need, you know, out of our software applications. But I think that's a great place to cap it off. Shelly, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Just work with students, get involved in health IT. There's a lot of different areas in health IT, which Todd knows, all the way from down to the nitty-gritty of building clinical decision support algorithms, to applications, to standards development work. Lots of associations that are involved. There's great opportunities. Always feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure that Mike and Todd can get hold of me if they need to.
That's right. That's awesome. Well, we're going to wrap it on that. I want to thank Todd Urey and the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I want to thank Shelly Spiro and the Pharmacy HIT Collaborative. Please check them out. It's pharmacyhit.org. Go ahead and check out their website and learn about all of the cool and interesting things they're doing to help pharmacies be successful. Make sure to look under the hood of your software. I want to thank you, our listeners. Thanks for spending some time with us today. My name is Dr. Mark Fulton, and we'll see you next time on Framework Focus.